When he brings the booty back to Philistine king, the king asks him, "Where have you been?" And David says, "Oh, I raided this city in Judah, I raided that city in Judah." The king is content because David is not only serving his interests, but he is also enriching the Philistines. By making himself the enemy of his own tribesmen, the king knows or believes that David is going to be his vassal forever.
But in reality, David was anything but an enemy of his people.
What he does is that he fights all kinds of nomads that are molesting the people of Judah and helping them. And by this, actually, he got the support of the people of Judah.
But David couldn't keep the Philistines from attacking Judah.
The Philistines are very successful in their aggression against the tribes of Israel. They're so successful that it reaches a point where there is going to be a single battle that's going to determine who controls the Central Mountains.
Once again, it's the Bible that retells the story. After a number of battles, Saul gathered all his forces at Mount Gilboa in the north. The Philistines mustered their forces and allies together to fight Saul. At first, it appeared that David would participate.
David comes up with King Achish of Gath because David is a vassal of that king. The Philistine lords look at him and say, "Why are you bringing him? He's one of them." And so King Achish sends him home.
The Philistine army was soon face to face with Saul's forces, and they began to outfight them. Saul's army retreated up the gentle slope of Mount Gilboa. Philistine archers followed in hot pursuit in their chariots. One of the Philistines' favorite weapons was the horse-drawn chariot. Now, this kind of primitive tank was relatively useless on uneven terrain or rough ground. But give the Philistines a flat field, and they could use the mobility of a chariot like this to attack Saul's army in the flanks or even in the rear. The chariot-mounted Philistine archers followed close on Saul's heels, easily moving along the traversable western slope of the mountain. Then, they opened fire on the Israelites, who were trapped on a flat plateau. The maneuver worked. Saul's army was doomed. When Saul realized that all was lost, he chose to fall on his sword. Following Saul's death, it was now possible for David to come back to Hebron and be reunited with his fellow clansmen of the tribe of Judah. Like many great conquerors, David knew he could win favor with both his sword and his purse. So, on the way home, he raided the Amalekites, hated enemies of his tribe. He brought back a wealth of slaves and gold to the welcoming tribe of Judah.
So it's no coincidence that then shortly down the road, when David is looking to become king of Judah, David's the top candidate, not only for what he's able to do militarily, but also he's kind of been buying votes, we might say.
With Saul's death, David was made king of Judah. But to become king of all 12 tribes, he'd have to battle Saul's legacy.
Saul has a son who escapes death. His firstborn son, Jonathan, was killed, but another son establishes the seat of his kingship in Transjordan, at a place called Mahanaim.
What followed was something like a modern mob war. After 2 years in power, Saul's son is murdered, and so is his top general, Abner.
And you have a kind of a pattern that emerges. You have one enemy after another who dies, usually violently, and David benefits, but David is always depicted in the Bible as innocent, as having nothing to do with these deaths.
What happens now is that there is no king in the north. And the northern tribes come to Hebron, and they ask David to become their king. They say to him, "We know that when you were in the service of Saul, you went out to battle. It was you who kept us free. It was you who kept us safe." And they elect him king.
Now, David was not just king of Judah, but king of all 12 tribes of Israel, and this was a first in Israelite history.
David is intelligent. He is a great military strategist. He's also ruthless. And it's that combination that make him such a great conqueror, so successful.
As king and protector of all of the Israelites, David had unified his people, but that brought new problems. He needed a more suitable capital than Hebron, a capital that would be acceptable to all of the tribes and still compatible with his long-range goals. After a lot of thought, he settled on Jerusalem. But before he could make Jerusalem his capital, he had to capture it. After King David had joined the 12 tribes of Israel into what historians now call the United Monarchy, he really had his work cut out for him. You see, King David ruled at a time and a place where the very idea of nationhood was eerie and threatening to the Israelites. They were simply a band of unruly, warring tribes, and to them, the thought of a single monarchy was not only an abstraction, it was objectionable.
The Israelites were unable to live in peace with each other, and they had no sense of being part of a nation, or for that matter, being the center of an empire.
David's vision was to forge a modern nation out of this chaos of tribal feuding. He knew he needed a special city from which to rule, one that was centrally located and easily defended. He selected the hilltop town of Jebus, later to be known as Jerusalem.
He decides to install himself in the hill town of Jerusalem, not a traditional Israelite town, a town that belongs to completely different people.
The Jebusites were a sect of the Canaanites, the people who populated Canaan for centuries. David decided to conquer them and take their city as his prize. He specifically chose Jerusalem because it was home to people who had no ties to any of the 12 tribes. This would make it easier for all of the Israelites to accept the new capital.
David uses Jerusalem in the way, for instance, the colonies used the District of Columbia as a neutral capital that didn't belong to any of the original 13 colonies.
David also believed the city was conquerable.
On the basis of archaeological evidence that we have available, Jerusalem was weakly fortified around 1000 BCE. What they had available were fortifications that had been built, in some cases, 600 years earlier. The people of Jerusalem, the Jebusites, were not the enemies of any tribe. They had never attacked Israel. We know nothing about them. So David had no interest in killing these people. He was interested in the real estate and in controlling this area. He sends his general, his cousin Joab. Joab examines the possibilities.
And the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land.
The only written record that tells how David conquered the legendary city is in the Bible. But the account creates more confusion than clarity.
There are several theories of how David conquered Jerusalem. In the Bible, there's a very, very hazy or even nebulous description of something to do with touching the Tzinor, whatever that is. One suggestion was that it was some poorly understood cultic aspect in which there was some sort of a curse on the city or something of the sort.
Another interpretation is that Tzinor referred to some kind of pipe. In the 19th century, British archaeologist Charles Warren discovered an underground water system with a shaft carved through solid granite and leading up to the city from the Gihon Spring. Following Warren's discovery, the shaft was believed to be the route that David's general, his nephew Joab, would have used to secretly enter the city.
According to that, David's soldiers climbed up this water shaft and made a surprise entry into the city and captured the city. This, though, is problematic since nowadays, archaeologically, it seems to be that the Warren shaft was not in use and could not have been in use at that time.
But several years ago, another pathway in the underground system was discovered. Archaeologists date it to the time of David, so it could have been the Senor or pipe referred to in the Bible.
The discoveries found out that there was an earlier water system, dated to about 1800 BC. This water system was part of a Canaanite city, a very impressive and well-fortified city, and it was constructed 800 years before David was supposed to have been active.
Most experts agree that this is the most plausible scenario.
Theoretically, there is a water system through which Joab or David or anyone could enter the city in the 10th century. All I can say, it is possible, or it is not impossible, that Joab went through this system.
Historians aren't sure exactly how David conquered Jerusalem, but the results speak for themselves. Ultimately, he became the king of Jerusalem, and that city became the political and spiritual heart of his kingdom.
All the ancient remains in Jerusalem are located in this shallow mound or ridge. From the early Bronze Age onward, this is where Jerusalem was. So archaeologically speaking, there is almost a consensus that this is the city of David. This is Jerusalem of the Bronze and Iron Ages.
From the city of David, just a corner of what we know today as modern Jerusalem, King David was poised to devise and implement his grand strategy of uniting the 12 tribes and conquering new territories to secure the borders. David was now a great concern to the Philistines, Israel's longtime enemy. According to the Bible, the two sides clashed twice just outside Jerusalem. David won both battles. By pushing the Philistines back, David accomplished two vital triumphs. He proved to the Philistines he could successfully resist them, and he also proved to the 12 tribes that they could work together as a nation. Now, David began to build and expand his empire. To do so, he used a powerful symbol, the Ark of the Covenant. This was the vessel that carried the 10 Commandments when the Israelites wandered across the desert. So, after the Philistines retreated from the city where it was held, David took it back. He put it to use as a powerful symbol, a living testament to his power. David turned Jerusalem into a holy city, one that his people would surely give their lives to protect. With this accomplished, David looked to expand his empire.
He could also read the situation in an international level and see that at the time that he was rising, there was a bit of a vacuum in the ancient Near East. So that enabled him to expand his kingdom. And that fits in with the description that we have in the Bible.
In order to achieve his objectives, David built a powerful army, consisting of elite forces, militias from the 12 tribes, and mercenaries, largely consisting of his old Philistine comrades. Ironically, he trusted the Philistines the most because they had no loyalties to any particular tribe. King David's next mission was to conquer the territories outside his immediate sphere of influence. In the process of doing that, he carved out an empire for his people. After King David established his seat of power in Jerusalem, he set out on a series of conquests designed to protect Israel from threats outside and inside. The ancient ruins of Megiddo, not far from the northern border of Israel, are a case in point.
Most archaeologists agree that it is likely that David was responsible for the destruction of Megiddo, and that later, after it was destroyed, it was incorporated and became an important center of the United Monarchy.
Directly in the middle of Tel Aviv, at the Eretz Israel Museum complex, you can find further evidence of David's conquests. This is the Tel Quasil excavation of an ancient Philistine settlement. Archaeologists believe this was not a part of a major city. Nonetheless, it's yet another example of David's campaign to carve out an empire, even if it was a modest one.